Myself, my name is Gail McCormick. I'm a member of the board of the Historical Society of Frankford. I'm a retired history librarian and archivist, and an historian as well. And I've recently finished a 2-volume history of the Swedenborgians here in Frankfurt, of which John Roberts was one. But I'd like to introduce my colleague, Paul Marcasano, who I met through the first exhibit that we had here when the book came out. And we shared a common interest in music and history. And when I started digging into John Roberts, he seemed like the perfect person to sit with me here on the dais and provide some of his expertise. So Paul is a native of Mount Vernon, New York. He's a professional tenor vocalist, an organist, and a pipe organ restorer. He's currently Director of Marketing and Patron Services for Vox Amadeus, a nonprofit based in Gladwin that performs music from the Renaissance, Baroque, and classical eras at a variety of venues in the Philadelphia area. We're going to put up some information about that organization at the end. Paul is also a member of the American Institute of Organ Builders and the Organ Historical Society, which is now based in Villanova. Paul oversaw the implementation and launch of the Organ Historical Society's pipe organ database, and he'll be talking to you a little bit about that a little bit later. So I'm going to get started. As I said, what John Roberts came to my attention through my work on the Swedenborgian Church in Frankfurt. And like many of the early members of the church, the Roberts family were English immigrants. And about 90% of the English immigrants who came to the New Jerusalem Society were from Manchester, Salford area, most likely because of the textile industry there. But in this case, John Roberts, he was born November 12, 1829. His father, Edward, was a glazier and a painter, and he would carry that trade with him to Frankfurt. He and his 6 younger siblings were baptized in the New Jerusalem Church in Salford. Salford is just across the River Irwell from Manchester. And there was a school. Part of what was interesting working class people in these new nonconformist denominations was their reform. They were big on education, helping people out of poverty. The Industrial Revolution was really making things difficult. And this article from the Manchester Courier about the time that John Roberts was born shows that there were 300 Swedenborgians in Salford and 150 Bible Christians. And if you've seen the exhibit, in 1817, there was a whole group of Bible Christians who came to Kensington and settled there. But by 1840, they built a new church. Things were expanding. Although this photograph would have been taken quite a ways after that time period, you can already see the effects of the Industrial Revolution. And by the late 1840s, you had a lot of Irish famine immigrants coming into Manchester and Salford to use their skills. And it was becoming the Roberts on the census and in the city directories were living in very poor areas of Salford at this time. So in 1848, they go to Liverpool and they get on the packet ship Yorktown, which was a fairly new ship in 1847. And you can see here's John Roberts. He was 19 years old. He's an engineer. Now, an engineer could mean any number of things, but it did mean that he had skills in manufacturing and making things that worked. And then the rest of his family are here. For some unknown reason, his father identified himself as a farmer. No other documentation. He's always identified as a painter or a glazier. And John Roberts, at the age of 19 or 20, when he comes to Philadelphia, already has quite a work ethic. By March 21st, 1849, just a few months after he's come into the country, he's advertising his services, tuning pianos and working on organs, and he indicates this is the only clue we have to where he might have been working when he first came here. But he was working with Henry Nauf, a native German who was building organs in Philadelphia. And he indicates where he's living. Fair Hill Row and Germantown Road was northern Kensington. It was a new development carved out of the Norris estate. And although I couldn't find him in the city directory, his father, Edward, is at the same location. So he was probably living with them. And most likely, or possibly, at least I speculate, that the organ that John Roberts may have been working on with Henry Nauf was the organ for St. Paul's German Lutheran Church, which is here on the corner of Brown and North American, formerly St. John Street, because Henry Nauf was advertising that, announcing that that had been completed in December of 1848. So it would fit with the time frame that Roberts is talking about. The St. Paul's German Lutheran Church is gone, but what was St. John's Protestant Episcopal is now Holy Trinity Romanian Orthodox, and it's a historic William Strickland building. By 1850, the Roberts family had moved about 1.5 miles south of where they had been on Fair Hill Row in northern Kensington to the 7th Ward of the Northern Liberties, which is this area outlined in yellow here. And again, Edward Roberts, a painter, all of the family except for John. John probably lived in the area, but given that he was working with probably another organ maker, he was probably boarding or living with another family at that time. But more than likely, the family was already looking at Frankfurt as a possible place to live, because the New Jerusalem Society here in Frankfurt was really stronger than the one downtown. The one downtown in the 1840s, early 1850s was in disarray. But the one here in Frankfurt was flourishing, and particularly with music programs and programs for young people. And one of the ads that the Roberts family may have looked at were for lots right in this very area. Franklin Street, of course, is now Griscom Street, but all of these lots that had been carved out of the estate of Jacob Coates. Jacob Coates, on April 1st, 1814, bought the Jolly Post Hotel and all of this property along Orthodox Street. The only thing that's there is the hotel and then this one other structure here, another residence. He did not operate it as a hotel, but he passed away in the 1840s, and his wife lived in the property until she passed away about 1850, which is when this whole area was carved up into lots and began to be sold. And on April 1st, 1854, Edward Roberts, John Roberts' father, bought what were lots 45 and 46 on the Jacob Coates plan, which is right here on the corner of Frankfurt Avenue, or Main Street then, and Orthodox Street. One change you can see from the 1849 map is this structure here, which is where the Roberts family would live. That was their address. It was called, it was 7 West Orthodox Street, because it was the only thing on that block at the time. Here's the Jolly Post Hotel, of course. It was owned by Joseph Comley at this time. And then this shop, which I believe is where John Roberts originally had his shop. We know that John Roberts was in Frankfurt as early as 1853. The Frankfurt Herald, and this is right from the original hard copies of the newspaper that are right in our museum downstairs. John Roberts is advertising that he's offering his services to tune pianos. He's not yet talking about organs, and that orders for that could be left at C.C. Orum's store. Charles Oram had a dry goods store from the early 1840s, about 2 doors up from St. Mark's, and he was also a member of the church. But we know that he was building organs in Frankfurt as early as 1853, because this is one of only 2 fully functioning surviving organs of John Roberts. And the organ plate on it reads John Roberts, Frankfort near Philadelphia, 1853. And I want to thank, it was originally Smithtown Methodist Church in Seabrook, New Hampshire. It's now Trinity United Church. And they sent me this lovely photograph of it in its current situation. On March 20th, 1855, John Roberts married Susan Faunce. Reverend Isaac Borrell of the New Jerusalem Church married them at the church at Hedge and Bowser Street. Susan Faunce was the daughter of Daniel Faunce, who had recently purchased the old Samuel Pilling Hotel across from Walworth Park, which was the meeting place of the Oxford Providence Building and Loan Association and would later be called the Park Hotel. But we don't know why, but by 1855, he had left Frankfurt and gone to Cambridgeport, Massachusetts. Perhaps the New Englanders had seen the organ that he did for Seabrook, New Hampshire. He may have made a connection. We really don't know why, but he had gone to become an organ builder in Cambridge. He's still in Cambridgeport in 1860. 2 children by then, Clara born in 1856 and Edward in 1858, but they still maintained this connection with Frankfurt. Both of the children were brought here and they were baptized here in Frankfurt at the church. But tragedy struck in 1858. John Roberts' father, Edward, who I said was a painter and a glazier, at the age of 52, was working on a job here in Frankfurt on a 30-foot scaffold and fell to his death. What's interesting is that the most detailed obituary for Edward Roberts appeared in a Swedenborgian publication from England. And the details about his life and how he had supported the church in Salford were details that we couldn't have found any other way. So it was really important. So in 1860 then, Sarah Roberts is a widow and her 6 children, aside from John, who's still in Cambridgeport, are living with her. Her daughter Elizabeth had recently married John Kemp, a blacksmith, and he'll show up a little bit later. We know about when John Roberts returned to Frankfurt based on the work, his organ building record. He built an organ in Cambridgeport because it survived at least into the mid-20th century. It's not extant any longer, but it had a plate that mentioned that he had built it in Cambridgeport in 1861, and it was dedicated at the New Jerusalem Society in Brookline, Massachusetts in early 1862. But by 1863, this is an advertisement that appeared in the Inquirer in September 1863, and he's advertising that he has a shop now at Main and Orthodox Streets in Frankfurt, and that you can take the 5th and 6th Street streetcars. They go right past his shop every 20 minutes, day and night. And as is becomes his trademark, that he's inviting people to come look at this organ that he's just created for the New Jerusalem Church in Chicago. And he also provides testimonials from other places that he's made organs. And as Paul will mention later too, sometimes these announcements and descriptions of other organs are the only documentation of organs that have long gone that they ever existed in the first place. And unfortunately, the New Jerusalem Church in Chicago and, of course, the Roberts organ were destroyed in the Chicago fire in 1871. This photo I stumbled on here. It's a Guernsey Hallowell in the Guernsey Hallowell photograph collection. And it's really intrigued me because I think it may show, although perhaps after Roberts was gone, it may show the building where Roberts had his original shop. It's identified as Orthodox Street near Frankfort Avenue, but we know this has to be Frankfort Avenue or Main Street because this is where the streetcar tracks are running. So if this is Orthodox Street, if we take a look at the 1861 map and imagine that someone may have been taking a photograph right here across the railroad tracks, The Jolly Post would be just off the edge of this photograph, but that may very well be the building that John Roberts had his shop in. And even though Edward Roberts bought his property at Main Street and Orthodox in 1854, it wasn't until 1864 that the rest of these Coates lots began to be sold. Probably because in the midst of war, it wasn't really until the tide turned after Gettysburg in 1863 that it looked like the Union was probably going to survive, and real estate speculation was probably an okay bet. William Overington bought all of these lots here between Orthodox, Leaper, and Penn Street, probably to make sure he knew who his neighbors were going to be. John Roberts buys 3 lots here on the corner of Penn and Orthodox, right down here. His brother-in-law, John Kemp, buys the next lot. The next one, it's bought by Anna Watson. She's the wife of Samuel Watson, and they're the parents of Frank Rushmore Watson, who will be known later for his church architecture. And then at the very end here, in 1867, Seventh United Presbyterian buys this lot. And soon after, Roberts buys the property at Penn and Orthodox. This is an ad that he put in the city directory in 1867 saying that he had just completed extensive renovations on this building, inviting people to come see his organ building operation. He lists some of the organs where he could get references, and his organ building really takes off. Here in 1870, when he's announcing a new organ that he's built for the Methodist Church in Camden, this is one of those gems where he lists several other organs, both in Philadelphia, but also in Chicago, Dayton, Wilmington, Trenton, La Crosse, Salem, all places that give us a chance to look where else he might have built organs that no longer exist. The second organ that still is extant that John Roberts built is also its claim to fame as the first Carnegie organ. Most of you are well aware that Andrew Carnegie funded public libraries around the country, but you may be less aware that he also funded organs, and this particular one was the first one. John Roberts was commissioned to build this organ in 1874 for the New Jerusalem Society in Pittsburgh. And the Pittsburgh Society had been the home church of Andrew Carnegie's father. And although Andrew Carnegie did not stay in the church, he would remember later in his autobiography that that church was where he was inspired, where he got his musical inspiration. And he didn't want to put a lot of money into the church itself, but he was happy to provide funding for the organ. The organ plate, Mike and I, the organ was moved in 1986, and it's now in the Swedenborg Church in Urbana, Ohio, and thanks to the congregation there for welcoming us this summer. But you can see the organ plate specifically says that it was built by John Roberts in Frankfurt in 1874. So here, John Roberts is, he's kind of coming into his own. He's got an advertisement here, and he's listed in the annual report of the Board of Trade as an organ builder. And you can see the changes that have occurred by that time on Orthodox Street. Here's William Overington. Here's Harvey Rowland of the Cheltenham Rowlands. He's bought one of the former Overington properties. Thomas Folkrod. Richard Watma was a gas fitter. He was married to John Roberts' younger sister, Louisa, and it was their daughter, actually, Miriam Watma, who donated the melodeon. John Roberts, his 3 lots are here, his home and his workshop. Next to it would have been his brother-in-law, John Kemp, but at this time he would have just sold it to Daniel Hallowell. And if anybody's interested, these are the two lots, and then the Watson family, which I mentioned. So the Watson lots and the old Kemp lot is where we're sitting right now. And if anyone's interested in finding out a little bit more about that, Fred Prescott in the back, a member of our board, has done some really excellent research in our archives about the history of our building on this property. And then finally, Seventh United is here, but they are also in the midst of selling. It's turned out that it's too big a church for them, and they end up, as you know, they built another church, a Watson-designed church, actually, the corner of Orthodox and Lieber Street, and they sell their existing church to Central. But the Roberts family, the fortunes change very quickly on the evening of September 26, 1875. There had been 4 decades since streetcars began running. There were controversies over places where 2 streetcar lines or a train and a rail line intersected at grade because of the danger involved in that. And so that's what happened this evening. You had Pennsylvania, a Sunday excursion train on the Pennsylvania Railroad connecting railway coming from Jersey City toward Philadelphia. And then you had a dummy car. In fact, it was so crowded, the dummy car train running from the 5th and 6th Street station back to the Frankfurt station was not only was full, but they had added an old horse car to the back of it, and that was full of people too. And so this is where they collide. And it's a horrific tragedy. The newspapers write about it for days, describing the carnage. And there, in the end, 5 were dead, 21 injured, and among them were John Roberts and his 19-year-old daughter, Clara. The Philadelphia Times managed to find John Roberts the next day. He had a broken thigh, and as would turn out later, he had other injuries as well. But he describes his eyewitness account of what happened. So John stated that as the car approached the railway track, he distinctly saw the swiftly coming train and was horror-stricken when he saw that the dummy was not coming to a standstill, but was carrying its passengers into the very jaws of death. He exclaimed, "For God's sake, stop the car, stop the car. Oh, Clara, we're gone." In an instant came the awful crash. Miss Roberts also saw the approaching train, as did others. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of finger pointing, which engineer of which train was in the wrong, what happened. Going back again to was the danger of crossing at grade. And so there were obviously numerous lawsuits by families of the injured and the deceased, lists that both John Roberts and his daughter were badly injured, and the lawyer that they had. And it mentions that the face of the latter, meaning Clara Roberts, was disfigured for life. I don't know if that's journalistic hyperbole. We've never found any photos of the Roberts family, but Clara Roberts never married, and she always lived a very quiet life with other members of her family. And John Roberts, and Paul will talk about this too, how there are changing tastes in organs at this time, but also you can see the change in Roberts' health at this point. Most of the advertisements that you see are not for new organs. For instance, this one from 1876 is an organ that he has rebuilt, where he had built an organ initially. And here he goes to Europe and both also back to England, probably to see family and friends since he's not well. And that he's selling an organ that he had made for another church that probably was now flush and was building a bigger organ. So finally, on August 12, 1877, at just 47, he died of complications from spinal meningitis. And in his obituary, he makes it very clear that it was the collision that precipitated this. And in looking it up, it's considered a rare occurrence, but if there is a spinal injury, spinal meningitis, the virus that causes that can cause that. And considering this is 1874 and the medical opportunities available, it probably was likely. His son son Edward rather, continued the business briefly, but he probably did not really have the aptitude or the interest in it. His widow sold the house at Penn Orthodox Street in 1885. His daughter Bertha marries Herman Rowland, who's a nephew of their neighbor, Harvey. And by 1890, his son Edward had taken up his grandfather's trade of painting, and he dies in 22. By 1900, the 1900 map shows that the old Roberts home and workshop is gone, and the duplex that you see now on the corner has already been constructed. And poor Clara, she dies during the flu epidemic of pneumonia, during the flu epidemic. And Bertha Rowland dies in 1931, and all of them, including Edward Roberts and Sarah Ellis Roberts, are buried in Cedar Hill Cemetery. So we'll take questions at the end, but now that I've told you something about John Roberts' story, Paul's going to tell you something about his trade and about how John Roberts' work fits into the history of organ building in Philadelphia. So Paul.
Good evening. I want to thank the Society and Gail for inviting me to join in this talk. Gail's talk was interesting and impressive when I was here last year. So you've heard all evening lots about John Roberts building the pipe organ. One of the main questions can simply be, what is a pipe organ, all right? Number one, it's a musical instrument. And I've had very intense discussions with friends who are museum curators and conservators who have a different opinion of these things. That, well, it's a lovely piece of furniture and we should conserve all the rotten leather by putting a little bit of glue to stabilize it and never touch it and never use it. But organs occupy a very interesting part of the world. They start out, they're in churches, but through our history until today, they're in homes. They're in the beginning of the 20th century, there was the epitome of being the wealthy and the elite by having a wonderful pipe organ in your home. And in the 19th century, and again in a resurgence in the last 25 to 30 years, they're showing up in concert halls again, which is a wonderful thing for those of us in the business. That being said, they're usually a bit large. They take up space. They often have elaborate casework and facades, so they are something of a piece of furniture as well. Just like the built-in bookcases around the room, the organ becomes built-in and often part of the space, part of the room, even if it's freestanding in a case, like the bookcases could be freestanding and moved. They also are expensive. At a time when a pastor's salary might be $300 a year, the organs cost quite a bit. And I found a lovely example about the cost of things here. Layman City and Suburban Homes Guides says that this lovely house in a downtown, and you can see a 4-story, beautiful, probably brownstone home for $17,000. In the little article on the left, I highlighted in red that the recent organ installed in some small church of a relatively not large size organ was $8,000. So you're talking about an investment. And then when the churches install the organs, the organ builders often gave 5-year tuning and warranty for at least a year or two. They often came around once a year on a circuit to come tune. But why are they so expensive? How do they work? What's involved? Well, complicated engineering to do a very simple thing means a lot of labor. Still today, even with modern systems, solid state controls, and non-mechanical or mechanical building, about 75 to 85% of an organ's cost is labor. Now, labor was nice and cheap in the 19th century. Today, it's a lot more. So that's why organs are now hundreds of thousands, if not millions, to produce. But they are also a very simple machine that has a somewhat complex operation to make them work. On the left, you can see pipes sitting on a wooden chest. On the right, a little exposure of underneath the pipe, there's a box filled with the pressurized air from the pumped air that comes in. You can see the connections of a square connected to a piece. I should use the pointer here. This piece here would pull this connector. This square transmits the motion from left to right, up to down, and it moves this piece of wood in and out. And you see this opening here. When the stop is turned on, it lines up with the pipe, which lets air from this pressurized air come up through the pipe, and the pipe speaks. Very simple, a bunch of little levers. However, when an organ's 3 stories tall and 20 feet deep and 40 feet wide, or if the console's over here and one of the divisions of the organ's back there at the back of the room, and trackers go down onto the floor, across, and back up and transmit the motion, they can be very complicated. Well, John Roberts was little known to me before Gail came and asked about it. He comes from England, which a lot of builders in Philadelphia do. Builders in America start in 2 places mostly. In Pennsylvania, in the 18th century, the Southern Germans, the Bavarians, move into central Pennsylvania, and there's very much a rustic German organ building going on. In New England, there's more English transfer, and there are more English-style organs being built. The organists, the organ builders of both regions, for the most part, stayed very local and regional until we get into the after the first quarter of the 1800s. People start moving around a little more, installing organs a little further away. It was a lot of travel to do, but Philadelphia fits in as being rather different than the countryside. A dear friend of mine, Orpha Oxy, who I believe is 99 and still going strong, but living a lovely retirement. I have a few quotes from her. Philadelphia was the largest city in America for a lovely short time, which I think contributes to Philadelphia's self-image issues. But in 1790, the population was only 42,000 and some, and we were the largest city in America. By 1820, New York has outpaced us. It's much larger. By 1860, Philadelphia is about 500,000, a little more. And interestingly enough, it is the financial troubles leading up to and during the Civil War and after that lead to Philadelphia's great growth. Philadelphia County, Philadelphia City was a tiny little area of downtown between Spring Garden Street and what is now South Street. That was the city. The rest of it was the county. In 1854, there was a unification of all of this. Philadelphia basically absorbed all the surrounding towns and boroughs. Now, in the rural communities, resistance to change is a part of the nature of the beast. Orpha describes it very well. It's not peculiar to Pennsylvania, but it had a particular significance there. meaning we don't like change and that's just fine with us. However, the city becomes a little bit more diverse and becomes a little more culturally progressive. In Philadelphia, we see here that there are organs being built in the 1820s, 1830s by various people. Henry Corey was a Philadelphia builder. A.G. Hunter, we don't know much about him. He was also local. Henry Urban was from New York. And there are also, oh, there's one more slide. There are also organs from New England coming here. Before about the 18 teens or 20s, most organs were imported from Europe. The first organ builder in America is a Moravian named David Tannenberg. He's considered the first American organ builder. But many of these folks came from England. Henry Corey came from England. Thomas Appleton came from England and went to Boston. And the progression of organ building in New England and Philadelphia sort of follows the English model more than the German model. It's also a bit conservative. John Roberts comes to Philadelphia, as we know, about 1848 or thereabout. Interestingly enough, in that little side trip he took to Cambridge that Gail told us about, somehow, perhaps with the Salem organ, and usually when an organ builder installs an organ in a place away from home, they get some local organ folk to help put it together. But whatever the case was, from sort of obscurity in Philadelphia, John Roberts gets a testimonial that he prints in the newspapers and ads, and this one was printed in the Philadelphia Inquirer in 1869, from Thomas Appleton, who was considered the father of organ building in New England. And it says, I'm going to read this because it's very entertaining. March 10th, 1869, Salem, Massachusetts. I do hereby certify to the full and entire ability of Mr. John Roberts, now of Frankford, Philadelphia. He has moved back. In the capacity of either organ builder, repairer, tuner, voicer of church organs, signed by Thomas Appleton. And just in case you didn't know, he names himself the father organ builder of Boston, Massachusetts. Facilities for the building of first-class organs in every department unsurpassed. Orders respectfully solicited. So he's advertising for himself at the same time as saying, this John Roberts guy is really good. And we didn't know a lot about John Roberts, but he is sort of a bridge from the older, more conservative organ builders who are building in a style that is more reminiscent of the prior generation back home in England, than the progressive organ building that comes just after him in the 1870s and 1880s in Philadelphia. David Tannenberg's successors lead us right to Henry Knauf Sr., because he, another German descent organ builder, is building in Philadelphia, infamously or not, often rebuilding David Tannenberg's organs. And this is a pattern of organ building throughout history. Each successor of the company goes back to the old company jobs and says, we can rebuild your organ and make it even better. In any case, the mid-century in Philadelphia is a lively, progressive time. The war makes some interruptions, but in the 1850s, and then the mid to late 1860s, organ building takes off through the 1870s. I mentioned here John C.B. Stanbridge, who was the organist of Christ Church. He comes out of nowhere, also from England, and becomes the premier organ builder in Philadelphia for 15 or so years, maybe 20 years. culminating in many organs built and many large organs, including the large 50-stop 4-manual organ at the new Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul on Logan Square that he built in 1868. And in the 1880s, there's a huge progression in the development of organ building in Philadelphia, where Philadelphia tries to establish itself as the lead. We are the lead. We've got the thing. We're even better than those guys up in New England that we all, honored previously. John Roberts encompasses a bridge between these things. He's tonally conservative. He's building, if you look at his stop list of what stops, what voices are on the organ, his organs are very traditional, very staid, very typical of what you'd find in the earlier part of the century here and also back home in England. We don't know about his background in England. We don't know if he apprenticed with anyone there. We don't know if his only exposure to organ building was Henry Knauf, though there is a debate and a sort of newspaper fight about whether he worked for Henry Berger of Baltimore. In one place, he attests he definitely did work for him. Other people vehemently say no, he didn't. Part of that may have been Mr. Berger's reputation, because all of his organs seemed to get rebuilt and replaced within 10 years, and maybe people didn't want to associate John Roberts with a guy who might not have been the greatest organ builder around. We don't know. This is part of the fun of historical research. And when you find some of these articles either attacking or supporting each other, it's quite entertaining. Now, originally, Gail contacted me because she sent me a picture of this facade, which is sitting in the display room in the back there. These pipes here are not speaking pipes. They are made of wood, and they are half round. They're what we call dummy pipes. There's a little close-up of the mouths of them, so it shows that they're solid wood and they don't speak. But of the organs that Mr. Roberts built, this was very common style. The Moline Company in Moline, Illinois, built organs with half-wood dummy facades because you wanted to dress up the front. As you see in some churches, a lot of exposed pipes on chest up front or in the back or somewhere, and it was very 20th century in the post-Art Deco period. But in the 19th century, it was considered vulgar to have your pipes exposed, so we had to have a facade. Now, the facade either was speaking pipes, and when they were not speaking pipes to put in, we made the dummy facades. At times, this could have been a side or central panel with speaking pipes to either side of it. I don't know if that number 17 is correct anymore. We may have found a couple more organs that Mr. Roberts built since I made this slide. I think there are 22 that we know of, 2 that have been rebuilt and have some roots in his organ, or some of his pipe work is still there, and the 2 extant that Gail mentioned that we know about. But this helps to place us in also the style Roberts built. It was not too pushy, not too exaggerated, not too extravagant, and small to medium-sized organs. He didn't build huge, grand organs. However, he got a contract in 1868 for Grace Methodist Church in Wilmington. And this beautiful facade on the left is John Roberts. Although the church architect or carpenter may have actually built it, it would have been built in conjunction with design with the organ builder, saying, I need this much height, I need this much space, and I've got to put these pipes in it. And the newspaper in the Delaware Tribune in 1868 reports on the organ, this fine instrument contains in its construction 30,000 pieces of wood. Well, newspapers love statistics. They talked about the weight of an organ and how many rail cars it took to ship later on. So the 30,000 pieces of wood and metal. The organ, unfortunately, was not finished in time to be used today. Work on it will be complete in about 3 weeks, and it will be in tune and ready for use in about 4 weeks. So as usual, Mr. Roberts was typical as an organ builder not quite getting things done on time, but he got things done. And you should notice particularly this very symmetrical front of the church, typical three-part stained glass window, because about 1915, Charles Haskell Company, who is a Philadelphia builder, builds a matching case on the right side, but there are no pipes behind it. It's just against that dummy stone wall, but he decides we want to have some symmetry and balance. Now the wall's filled in, the mirror, the stained glass is gone, and he's rebuilt the organ using some of the material. We don't know how much, but here is the case standing today, still extant in the church with its original facade pipes from John Roberts' organ. The blank wall is replaced once again now with an arched three-part solid single view, single image stained glass. It's rather more elaborate. And we know we have this picture over here because the Wilmington Journal was kind enough to print a photo in 1916. By the late teens, reports of a local organ installed. Most of what we know is because of newspaper reports. By the teens in 1920 or so, there's hardly any reports anymore of such and such church has installed an organ by Mr. So-and-so. So we start to lose that important record. So any of you who think that we waste our time in dusty halls or skidding through microfilm and now on the computer, it's not a waste of time at all. It's often entertaining. And what I can say about John Roberts for sure is that he was a solid technician. He built organs that were good and that were used. They were replaced more from fashion than probably they were problematic. As I said, we know of about 22 organs. These are original installations by Mr. Roberts. And as Gail mentioned, I'm the chair of the Oregon Historical Society Pipe Organ Database Project. And that's one of the things that also connected us, because Gail found information about Roberts organs. And in turn, she sent me lots of articles and information about organs that we didn't have in the database. So it's a very living connection when you do research on any kind of historical research or organs, architecture, art, you name it. Our database has allowed us to have this kind of quick search, look for John Roberts, list the organs by him, and here they are. It's a crowdsourced piece of work. There's the homepage of the database. Statistics on the screen capture from last year. I can't quite read, it's a little under 70,000. When I took this screenshot, there were 72,372 instruments in the database, as well as 8,393 organ builders. I can tell you, I now have 8,447 organ builders listed, so it's always growing. And we have about almost 30,000 images in the database. And one of the advantages is you can look up an organ, and there it is, through a very flexible search feature that is meant to be friendly. So those people who are interested in organs can very easily find from the home page up here in the top left, there's 3 hash lines, which indicates menu. When that drops down, you get instruments, search instruments, add instruments, etc. You enter the information you want. You'll get a screen like this where you put in the location name, the city, or if you can search by builder. One of the things we recommend is less is more. If you put in too many terms, you'll get no results because you don't get all of the terms that you're looking for. This is not a a Google Smart Search. It's based on what you put in. So typically, there's examples there. I want to see what's the organs that were at All Saints Church in, I don't know, Wynwood. Well, you type in All Saints, and as you type that, it's a live sorting, and in the bottom down here, fill in all the organs that have All Saints. If you go to city and put in a city, it'll filter out everything but anything in that city. And if you get no results, then you can go back and get rid of the name of the church and put in just the city and state and find out, are there any organs listed there in the database. But it's been an interesting thing. It's brought some late night work for me, but it's also allowed me to get to know Mr. Roberts so much better that I almost feel like he's a colleague. And before I got into this with Gail, I knew little to nothing about him. And his connections locally, in 1854, there was the unification of Philadelphia, where Frankford was one of the surrounding towns and boroughs. And Gail and I were talking before how that seemed to have an effect overall. And she mentioned how Frankford was preferable to the downtown church of the New Jerusalem church that was here. So they decided to move here. That's been something of a history of Philadelphia. So it's interesting, quickly to Philadelphia, but John Roberts becomes quite a Philadelphian in being loyal to his neighborhood and not the city. Here's a few stats to show you what we've done with the database. It first went online in 2005. It's been through, this is the fourth iteration. This new interface is probably the best working one. But everything that's colored in here is a country that somebody has searched the database from or accessed it. We have here the top countries at the moment, in June of 2023 when I took this snap. So United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Germany. Every once in a while you get some surprises, but there it is. We think we have a very good tool and something useful, and we're kind of proud of it. And I'm proud of it because I was the one who kept arguing in 2005, oh yes, it can be put online, just let me do it and I'll get somebody to do it. I don't know how to do it, but I'll find someone. It's an enormously powerful database, and our traffic is very good, especially in the organ world. About the 14 to 18,000 visitors per month come to see the database and use it. About 225,000 unique users per year have accessed it. And the current iteration has been up since January of 2024. So these statistics are current, the last year and a quarter. And also of those people that view 400,000 to 500,000 page views, which means that they look at an organ record. But the most interesting statistic is that when they come to our database, they stay on the website for about 3 to 6 minutes, which in computer world and web world is an eon. So I think I've reached the end of my bit. Anyone with questions about the database or Mr. Roberts, I'd be happy to answer. And then I just want to thank again Gail and the Frankfurt Historical Society for inviting me to participate. And I'm going to give a shout out to John Roper, our database designer, who is the one who came up with the whole new interface, the new sorting system, the new everything that makes it work much faster than it used to be. And Ed McCall, the chief executive officer of OHS, being behind us and letting us do it. And I guess the last bit of a commercial, Gail asked me if we should include this. She mentioned that I work for Vox Amadeus. We're a Baroque and classical orchestra and chorus. We put on about 12 programs a year in about 22 performances. This is our 38th concert season we're in the midst of. They're having a concert on March 23rd, my birthday, so I have to work on my birthday, but It's a chamber orchestra concert of Albinoni, Bach, and Corelli. And on Good Friday evening, we are presenting the Bach St. John Passion on Baroque instruments. So happy to talk about that as well, but I thank you all.
Okay, we have no questions online. Does anybody have any questions for us now? All right. Well, thank you for your attention. If you should think of a question, we'll be around and more than happy to answer it. Thank you for coming.
Thanks a lot.
Ooh, thanks. That was great.
I was trying to watch the time so I didn't run over.
No, it was great.